First of all, I'd like to thank y'all for your attendance, and I appreciate Mark and Jeffrey inviting me to come down here for this meeting. I apologize for being late. I didn't get to hear Mark's talk, but I left Suffolk this morning, and I got a little turned around getting down here to Clinton, so I was a little late. But as I was driving, I started worrying because when Mark Knauer asked me to give this talk in the email, he referred to it as Clinton, Iowa. And then he offered to pay my mileage, and I thought, well, damn, why not give me an airplane flight out here? But anyway, once I was lost, I thought, well, maybe I could have got to Iowa by now. So anyway, what I'm going to do is talk about a couple of studies we've done at Virginia Tech, and it's focused on effects of nursery and grow finish experience on future cell productivity. And this is our Tidewater Agricultural Research and Extension Center in Suffolk, and I know y'all have a Tidewater Center in North Carolina as well. But anyway, one of the focuses of the research that we have going on there is to develop and evaluate best management practices for gilt development that optimize future reproductive capacity and longevity in the breeding herd. And specifically, one of the things that we've looked at most recently has been the effects of floor space allotment in the nursery on future reproduction in replacement gilts. And that's the first study I'm going to talk about. Now, if you look at this data, this is from the group out at Kansas State University, and it was published in the Journal of Animal Science in 2008. And this study actually looked at the effects of space allowance during rearing in the grow finish barn. Okay, and they looked at rearing from 84 to 282 pounds of body weight, and these were PIC gilts, and they tracked reproduction over 3 parities. In this study, they had 2 floor space allotments, almost 13 square feet in one treatment, and just over 8 square feet in the other. And you can see they had a pretty large number of gilts that were in this study. After they left the grow finish farm, they went out onto sow farms, and they followed their reproductive performance through 3 parities. And as I'll talk about with our study in the nursery, it was a similar situation in this particular grow finish study, in that it was in commercial conditions, so there really wasn't the opportunity to change the floor space allowed by changing configuration of the pen. So in order to change the amount of floor space allowed to each of the pigs, you had to change the number of pigs that were put in the pen. So from a scientific standpoint, stocking density is confounded with the number of pigs per pen. So I kind of throw that out as a disclaimer right here at the beginning, because that'll be the same situation with our nursery trials. Regardless, so to get that 13 or 12.16 square foot floor space, they had 15 gilts per pen. To get the 8.29, they had 22 gilts per pen. They looked at the percentage of gilts that were pubertal by 200 days of age, and they did see an effect with the gilts that were allowed more floor space. A greater percentage of those had expressed estrus by 200 days of age, and their average age of puberty was about 2 days less than the gilts that were in more restricted floor space situation. But if you looked at their reproduction, parities 1 to 3, you look at total born, number born alive, the number of pigs weaned, there was no statistically significant difference for any of those reproductive characteristics. Now, we had seen this data, and what we hypothesized at the Tidewater Center was that perhaps pigs going into the nursery, because they're younger and more fragile, perhaps that would be a time in their life where the stress of crowding may influence their future reproduction. So that was the basis of the study that I'm going to describe now. And we had as a background these reports, some of them from Virginia Tech, Hornegay, and Jeffrey told me to back up doing this. There we go. This study by Hornegay and Nodder and Lindemann and co-workers, they were both done at Virginia Tech, then some other work. This shows that, it's well documented that if you crowd pigs in the nursery, that's going to negatively impact growth performance. So we knew that. What we didn't know if that crowding in the nursery will alter subsequent reproduction. So the objective was to determine if floor space allowance during the nursery phase of rearing affects growth, physiology, immunology, and future reproduction and longevity in gilts. And this study was actually funded by the National Pork Board, and we also got funding from the Virginia Pork Industry Board, and it was conducted in a commercial setting, and it was conducted in a farm owned and operated by Smithfield Hog Production Division, which actually it was, as you know, Murphy Brown LLC back when the study was conducted, but I'm using the new name. And it was located in Cameron, North Carolina. And what we wanted to do is not only look at the floor space effects on future reproduction, we also wanted to look at some physiological and immunological measures of the pigs in the nursery that may serve as kind of biomarkers for some of these effects we might see out later on in life. So, just a brief chat about the methods. Again, we employed the facilities owned and operated by Smithfield Hog Production Division. Dr. Ashley DeDecker, is she here? She's not here, okay. She was instrumental in doing this study, and she organized things down there at the farm in North Carolina. It was farm 7186, and my grad student always wanted to make sure I said the people that were there to work on the farm. Beata, Pepe, Edgar, Nancy, and Ezekiel. Any of them here? Okay. And I forgot to acknowledge my grad student, Stuart Callahan, who did his master's doing this work. He's now in vet school at Virginia Tech. And I want to acknowledge him because during the time that he was here or there at Virginia Tech doing his master's, doing this research, I climbed up on something just like this in our family farm. I was getting in with a calf that had just been born and it wasn't doing too well. I fell off the top of this thing and broke my neck, and actually had to be airlifted to Norfolk and had emergency surgery. I was paralyzed for a while from the neck down. Anyway, all of this was going on. Stuart never missed a beat. He kept the study going in collaboration with Dr. DeDecker. And I just thought, out of all my grad students, he's probably been one of the most mature to be able to do that sort of thing. I say that too because if we get to some data that you think is kind of iffy, I'm going to just blame him. My neck is broken. I don't know. Okay, so anyway, at weaning, which was about 22 days of age, and the pigs weighed about 12 pounds body weight, Stewart sorted these gilts into size groups by eye. He sorted them into large, medium, and small gilts, and then randomly placed them in nursery pens to allow 1.83, 2.69, or 3.55 square feet of space per pig. And this farm where this was conducted, the nursery barn had 7 rooms each with about 40 pens per room. We used a total of 2,537 pigs from 13 consecutive weekly groups of weaned pigs. The gilts were weighed at the beginning and the end of the 7-week nursery phase of production. We determined average daily gain. Because we were in this commercial setting, we couldn't determine pen feed consumption, so we don't have average daily feed intake and feed to gain conversions. But we also collected blood samples from a subset of gilts from one of these 13 groups and had 18 gilts per floor space allowance, and that's what we use to determine blood chemistry profiles, complete blood counts, immunology, and cortisol. And then these gilts went out to 11 different sow farms, and we followed them in terms of reproductive performance through 3 parities. So I'd like to share with you now some of the results we found. This particular slide shows the ending body weight in pounds and also average daily gain during the nursery phase of production. And what we found was we had a floor space by pig size interaction for both ending body weight and average daily gain. And that interaction, if we interpret that, basically what we found is for those small size pigs, it didn't matter how much floor space they had. They had similar ending body weights and similar average daily gain. No statistical difference there. But if you look at the large and the medium sized pigs, there was a nice staircase sort of situation going on in both ending body weight and average daily gain, that as you decrease the amount of floor space per pig they were allowed, you saw decreases in the body weights and the average daily gain, which is consistent with what's been shown in some of the previous studies that I've already mentioned. Now, if you look at nursery depth loss, and I have this broke out to look at the effects of the floor space allowance as well as, that's an error there. That's Stewart's screwed that up. That should be size of pig, which large, medium, and small. No difference in treatments. Floor space allowance was about just over 2% mortality. Size of pig, there was no treatment effect, but if you look, we're probably getting a little bit of a linear effect there with the larger pigs having a 1.8% mortality, the smaller pigs 2.4% mortality. We really, when we went into this study too, we thought we might see some issues with tail biting and some other vices like that, and we really didn't see any increase in tail biting or any behavioral problems we could attribute to the crowded conditions. And in fact, the overall mortality was very good. Okay, so we wanted to look at indicators of stress. Okay, so I've got two measures up here. The one on the left-hand side is cortisol, which is the classical stress hormone, and that's a good indicator of acute type stressors because when an animal is faced with an acute stressor, then the animal's cortisol levels will go up. And if you look on the right-hand side, this is an immunological measure, the neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio, and that's been shown to be more indicative of an animal's response to chronic long-term stressors. Okay, and regardless, if you look at both of those, there was no statistical difference between either the cortisol, the floor space allowance, or the neutrophil to lymphocyte ratios. Okay, so if you're going to look at just two measures of stress, there really was no scientific evidence to say the more crowded conditions stressed out those animals. Now, we looked at, again, some hematology measures. Do we have veterinarians in the crowd? Any veterinarians?
Yes.
How many?
Raise your hand.
Raise your hands. Come on. Oh, my God. Okay, we got at least one nutritionist. Any other nutritionists? Man, I'm going to really be using Stuart's name in vain. I'll probably get in trouble here. Okay, first thing, hematology. And for the hematology results, we used as reference values this study by Bhattarai and Nielson was published in the Journal of Swine Health and Production. And keep that in mind because what we found is irrespective of floor space allowance, pig size, either large, medium, or small, or day of sampling, and we sampled these pigs on day 6 and day 56 in the nursery, we found that the hemoglobin concentrations were within these reference values, but the concentrations of white blood cells and red blood cells were greater, and the percentage of reticulocytes, which those are the immature forms of red blood cells, and mean corpuscular volume were less than the reference values. Okay, now what does all that mean in English? These pigs may have been suffering from iron deficiency, okay? And this is a characterization of iron deficiency that was put forth by Heska and co-workers in 1994. And they proposed that iron deficiency occurs in 3 phases. In phase 1, total body iron is diminished, but the production of red blood cells, a process called erythropoiesis, and hemoglobin synthesis is unaffected. During phase 2, hemoglobin remains unaffected, but the iron supply to the bone marrow is inadequate. And then finally in phase 3, the iron supply is insufficient to keep the hemoglobin levels normal or within these reference values. This is starting to be a little more investigated because there's been some studies, and they've been published in the Journal of Swine Health and Production, that larger pigs at weaning, larger pigs in a litter, they are more prone to develop iron deficiency once they're weaned. Okay, and what you'll see is, in some of our data, is kind of consistent with that thought. And what we've got here are the main effects of floor space allowance and pig size. on some of the measures of the complete blood counts, the hematology measures in these particular pigs. And what I've got out here on the left, I went ahead and added errors, and the error going up means that these values were above reference values. Error going down means these values were below reference values. Equal sign means these values were within the reference values, and so forth. And I have them for red blood cells, reticulocytes, hemoglobin, mean corpuscular volume, and white blood cells. So again, if you look at these arrows, they're consistent with what I said earlier from that Haska study, that pigs, you draw a blood sample, their hemoglobin may be normal, may be within the reference values, but they could still be in iron deficient status. They're just not at the phase 3 where you actually start to see an effect on those hemoglobin levels. What I thought was interesting is that if you looked at, say, reticulocytes, there was a significant effect of floor space allowance with those pigs that were most crowded. They had the lowest concentration of reticulocytes, the lowest percentage of reticulocytes, and that's suggesting that the severity of this anemia was exacerbated by the increase in crowding, or the lack of floor space. Also, you can see that the highest red blood cell distribution width, which that's a measure of the variability in the red blood cells that are being produced. You see that in cases of anemia, that was highest in the pigs that were allowed the least amount of floor space. If we go over here to pig size, you can see that the larger pigs had the greatest number of red blood cells. There wasn't a statistically significant effect, it was more of a trend, but you can see the concentration of white blood cells was the greatest in the large pigs. Reticulocytes were lowest in the large pigs, as was the percentage reticulocytes. But if you look at hemoglobin, hematocrit, they were highest in the large pigs. Again, this is consistent with this phase 2 anemia, where you don't see a difference in the hemoglobin. All right, veterinarians, is that okay, that interpretation? Okay, I'll let Stuart know. Okay, if we look at sodium, we're moving to some blood chemistry measures. And I've got up here reference values of 131 to 151. This is a study of nursery pigs published by Cooper and co-workers in 2014. I've got floor space allowance effects, pig size effects, and day effects. And for each of these graphs, you can see I've put the reference value range on here with the dotted line. You can see that in terms of floor space allowance, the pigs that were most crowded, their values were above reference values, whereas those pigs allowed the medium and the greatest amounts of floor space, they were within the reference values. Similarly, if we look at pig size, largest pigs were above reference values, medium and small pigs within. If we look at day 6 versus day 40, above reference values on day 6, within reference values on day 40. What is a physiological meaning of elevated sodium? Slight degree of dehydration. So it kind of makes sense here that the pigs that had the least amount of floor space maybe had lessened access to the nipple waterer. There's one nipple waterer in each pen. Consistent with that, the largest pigs, probably more competition between large pigs, less access to water. And then finally, this day 6 versus day 40 thing, early on, the pigs are probably suffering from dehydration associated with weaning and finding the nipple water. So that all really makes sense. Two other things I wanted to share with regard to the blood chemistry, because these were some effects or trends associated with floor space allowance. If you look at calcium concentrations in the blood, there was an effective treatment with the pigs that were allowed the least amount of floor space. They had the lowest calcium concentrations. You can see, I don't know if at this point there's a biological meaning to it, but there is a statistical difference of about 0.3 milligrams per deciliter between the least amount of floor space in the medium and about a 0.2 milligram per deciliter difference between the extremes in terms of floor space. Phosphorus was not significantly affected, but there was a trend, and it followed the same sort of pattern as what we found with the calcium. So again, we wanted to see, and hypothesize and think about it, some of those biomarkers that we measured in the nursery, if perhaps they may be related to some of the differences we saw in reproductive performance later on. So what I have here is first parity reproductive performance for the pigs. Allowed the 3 different floor space allotments, and you can see number of sows. We had 502, 389, 296 for those 3 different groups. You can see if you look at total litter size, pigs born alive, pigs born dead, no difference between the 3 treatments in terms of that first parity reproductive performance. If you look at second parity reproductive performance, now this would be after the pigs have been through the rigors of that first parity, and so sometimes you see some second parity drop in reproductive performance. So this is kind of interesting, because if you look here and you see the number of observations we have for the 3 different floor space allowances, we did see an effect of floor space on total litter size and number of pigs born alive, but it wasn't a situation where the pigs allowed the most floor space in the nursery had the greatest reproductive performance. It was actually those pigs that were allowed the 2.69 square foot of floor space each. They had the greatest total litter size and the greatest number of pigs born alive compared to the other 2 groups. Third parity reproductive performance, similar to first parity, in that no difference in total litter size, pigs born alive or pigs born dead for the gilts that were allowed the 3 different floor space allowances. Then this table shows total reproductive performance for sows farrowing either 1, 2, or 3 litters. And for this particular slide here, if a sow only farrowed 1 litter, then she got a 0 essentially for the production for the subsequent litter. So it's going to alter things a little bit. But what she's ultimate numbers, it'll be altered a little bit. But if you look here, you see that total litter size, there was no treatment effect, and number of pigs born alive, for those 3 parities, no effect there either. Now, if we look at sow retention and the way Stuart set up this particular slide, he's got the number of gilts that were allotted to the different floor spaces that entered the nursery on this first line, and then the number that entered the sow herd on the second line. I've got percentages here. And then of the sows that entered the sow herd and completed either the first, second, or third parity, they're indicated here. And what you can see is that if you look at of the gilts that entered the sow herd that completed the first parity, there was actually a significant effect with those gilts that were allowed the least amount of floor space having the highest percentage for parity 1. If you look at parity 2, parity 3, no significant effects. Then if you look at effective size of pig on sow retention, this table's set up the same way. If you look at the number of pigs that entered the nursery that then entered the sow herd as a percentage, that was lowest for the small pigs. Those completing parity 1 was lowest as well for the small pigs. And then those completing parity 2, parity 3, those percentages are similar. So to summarize this nursery study, decreasing floor space allowance in the nursery, it had a negative effect on growth during the nursery phase of production, which is consistent with several previous studies. Altered various physiological measures as determined by complete blood counts and blood chemistry analyses. However, serum cortisol and the neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio, they were unaffected, which these are 2 of our measures of stress in pigs. The floor space allowance did not affect nursery mortality, had some effects on future reproductive performance as evidenced by changes in the parity 2 litter size, and then it had some minimal effects on the proportion of sows reaching parity 1, 2, or 3. Now, the last slide I'd like to show, and this is hot off the press, really. And this is another study. This is where I'll get in trouble. It's a nutrition study, and Eric's probably sitting there laughing, saying, "Oh God, repro guy talking nutrition." But anyway, this is reproductive character. This is a study where we've looked at reproductive characteristics in gilts-fed diets that either contained menhaden fish oil or did not contain menhaden fish oil, and were farrowed by sows that consumed diets with or without the menhaden oil during both gestation and lactation. So we really have a 2-by-2 factorial arrangement of treatments, with the factors being the sow diet, either menhaden fish oil or controlled diet during both gestation and lactation, and the pig diet, either controlled diet or menhaden fish oil diets. And these diets, either the pig diet or the sow diets, either gestation or lactation, they were isocaloric and isolysinic in terms of their formulation. Okay, so the pigs that were getting control feed versus menhaden oil, they were getting the same amounts of energy. They were getting the same amount of lysine, okay? But the composition was different, including this menhaden oil as a source of these omega-3 fatty acids. We had 7 pins per treatment combination. Each pin had 3 gilts in it for a total of 84 gilts, and I'm showing just one data slide to show that there were some effects on age of puberty as well that were due to the sow diets, as well as age of puberty effects due to the pig diets. And they were opposite in nature. Because if you looked at the gilts that were farrowed by sows that were fed the menhaden oil during gestation and lactation, they reached puberty later than the gilts that were farrowed by the sows that were fed the control feed. If you look at the gilts themselves and looked at the different feed, then feeding that menhaden oil to the gilts actually advanced the onset of puberty relative to the controls, or at least a trend for that. So they really kind of canceled out based on whether they were from sows that were fed menhaden oil or they were actually consuming the menhaden oil themselves. If you look at some of the reproductive characteristics in those gilts, we actually we checked heat, determined their age of puberty, their first estrus, and then slaughtered them 8 to 11 days afterwards and collected their reproductive tracts. And if you look at the number of corporal lutea, which is an estimate of their ovulation rate, those gilts that were farrowed by sows that consumed this menhaden oil during gestation and lactation, they actually had over a 2 ovulation difference, suppression there. No difference in the gilts that were fed the menhaden oil versus control. In terms of the other reproductive tissue weights, ovarian, follicular fluid, luteal, uterine, no difference due to the sow diet. If we look at the pig diet, a trend for the gilts that receive the menhaden oil to have more follicular fluid, which would be indicative of greater follicular development. So that's really, we just kind of started putting all that data together, but I did want to share that with you because it's another indication of where management during gestation, lactation, and in this case nutrition management may have implications for future reproduction in gilts. So with that, I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Questions for Dr. Estienne?
Sure.
Probably you heard that a lot of times. What would be the justification for the litter size to be higher in the second parity? Or that difference of
We don't know. I mean, it could be related to one of the biomarkers during the nursery phase. But, you know, we associated that reproductive performance in second parity due to how much space they had during the nursery phase, but it's going to take more study to figure out what was it that was going on during the nursery phase that would cause something like that. Yes?
How many commercial sow farms did those gilts go into?
11.
They went into all 11. Okay.
Yeah.
It's maybe just something I missed, but on the floor space, the treatment was in the nursery. So then what was the management of floor space when you were?
It was consistent across treatments.
Other questions?
Did I read the graph right? You had reduced ovulation rates with fish oil.
When fed to the sows during gestation and lactation. And you know, it's not been a lot of reproductive type stuff in pigs done like that, looking at the omega-3 fatty acids at this point. But some of that poor reproduction that we saw in the offspring of sows that were fed the omega-3s is consistent with some work that's been done in rats and mice, and some of the beneficial effects that we saw when we actually feed it to the gilts. That's consistent with some pig work that was just put out there in terms of looking at follicular oocyte quality and things like that. Some European data. Sir.
Probably this was not part of the study, but did you see something in the performance of those sows fed with that oil?
Yeah, that's a good question. The question is, did we see differences in the reproductive performance of the sows that received the menhaden oil? And, you know, it was a small number of sows, but we actually did see a benefit of the oil on litter size in the very few, and I can't remember the exact number, but there was a very few primiparous sows, and in the primiparous, but not the multiparous, the primiparous sows, we saw some increase in litter size, total litter size, and number born alive if they were fed the menhaden fish oil. And then that kind of goes back to what we also saw because of that increase in litter size. There was also a decrease in average pig body weight, and that could be related to ultimately some of what we saw. Poor reproductive performance is actually a consequence of the birth weight issue. That's kind of a good lead into your talk, isn't it, Bill?
Yeah. I was going to ask you, Mark. So in these effects of nutrition, I've always been curious whether it's an effect on every sow, or if you have a subset of sows that may be low performing, like have less than 7 weeks alive, and you're really just influence those to respond like normal, and that's how you get your overall shift. Do you have any idea whether it's you're dealing with just a small subset or fix everything?
Yeah. You know, I can't really comment on that study about that, but I would agree with you that, you know, it's just like if we go back to where we first started talking about flushing gilts to increase ovulation rate. You know, that was going to work in situations where the gilts were kind of below body condition and low plane nutrition. You flush feed them and it increases ovulation rate. So I would, you know, think it's the same sort of situation. Some sows are going to be a little poor in body condition, not consuming as much feed. Then in that situation, these sorts of treatments could have an effect, whereas a sow that's in real good body condition, eating a lot, she may not respond. It's a good point.
All right, let's give Dr. Estienne a nice round of applause.
Thank y'all.